I never told my son what I really kept behind the false wall of my boat repair shop. When he married a woman who could smell money through steel and concrete, I made sure she would never find the ledger. But while I was home watering my tomatoes, my shop foreman called me in a dead panic. "Boss, your daughter-in-law is here." She brought a locksmith and a man with a truck. I did not panic. I had been waiting 3 months for this exact moment, and what I did next ended her greedy little game for good. If you're riding along with me tonight, hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss my next story. Tell me in the comments, son, daughter, neighbor, friend, whatever you call yourself to me, where you're listening from and what time it is on your end. I love knowing who's out there with me tonight. It was 10:15, and the marina was quiet except for the halyards clinking against the masts in the wind. I'm Walter Briggs. I'm 68 years old, and I spent 44 years pulling engines out of dead boats and putting them back together better than new. People see me now, gray stubble, oil-stained cap, a limp in my left knee from a winch that got away from me in 1994, and they think, there goes a simple man who fixes boats. They don't know what it took to build Briggs Marine Salvage out of a single rented slip and a toolbox I still have. They don't know what a man learns about people when he spends 4 decades watching who pays their bill on time and who disappears the moment the invoice comes due. My cell phone buzzed against the kitchen counter. Not many people have that number. One of them is Ray Delgado, 61 years old, a former harbor patrol officer who has run my shop floor with total loyalty for 18 years. I picked it up. "Walt, it's happening," Ray said. "No, hello." His voice pitched low. "Vanessa's here at the North Building. She's got a locksmith and some guy with a flatbed." I took a slow breath. "Is Danny with her, Ray?" "No, just her, the locksmith, and the truck driver. She's got paperwork in her hand, waving it at anybody who looks at her." I set down my coffee mug. "Let her in, Ray. Don't call the police. Don't stop her. Pull the guys back from that building and let her walk right up to that door." Ray hesitated the way a man does when he thinks his boss has lost his mind. "Walt, you sure about this? She looks like she means business." "I'm sure," I said, my hand resting on the edge of the counter where a photo of my late wife, Carol, sat in a small brass frame. "Let her cut every lock in the place if she wants to. Tonight she finds out exactly what kind of trap she's been building for herself." I hung up the phone. To understand how a woman ended up standing outside my North Storage building with a locksmith at 10 at night, you have to go back 3 months. To the exact day I felt the first cold prickle of doubt crawl up the back of my neck. My son Danny is 34. He's a good kid, soft in some ways. His mother and I probably made him. Quick to trust, quicker to forgive. He runs the customer service side of my shop, the part where you smile at people and explain why their outboard motor costs what it costs. When Carol passed 4 years ago, I made a promise to her at the graveside that I would watch over that boy like a hawk, because Danny has never once in his life imagined that another person could want to hurt him. He married Vanessa a 1.5 years ago. She's a brand consultant, whatever that means exactly. She has a laptop, a ring light, and an Instagram page with 40,000 followers where she talks about abundance mindset between ads for teeth whitening strips. She never had much money before Danny. After Danny, she suddenly had opinions about our family's money. It started at their anniversary dinner at a steakhouse downtown. I was sitting there in my one good sport coat, happy just to watch my boy hold his wife's hand across the table, when Vanessa set her wine glass down a little too hard. "Walter," she said, smiling that smile she uses for the camera. "I drove past the marina last week, that big storage building on the north end, past the fuel dock, the one that's always locked up." "What is that place, exactly?" I kept chewing. I set my fork down slow and careful, but inside, every alarm bell I owned started ringing at once. I have never once discussed that building with Vanessa. I've barely discussed it with Danny. It's an old maintenance shed, nothing on the outside but rusted siding and a chain on the door, sitting on land that isn't even zoned for anything interesting. There was no reason on God's green earth for a woman who sells skincare routines online to know that building existed, let alone to be asking about it over steak. "Just an old equipment shed," I said, keeping my voice easy. "Nothing but spare parts and dust." "Why do you ask?" She laughed, light as air. "No reason. It just seems like it's taking up a lot of waterfront acreage for a junk closet. You know land values around here. Have you ever thought about selling it off?" I know some developers who'd about kill for that lot. I looked over at my son. Danny was grinning at his wife like she'd just said something clever, completely blind to the way her eyes had gone sharp and hungry for just a second before the smile came back. My gut, the same gut that spent 40 years spotting a con man before he opened his mouth, told me something was very wrong. I paid the bill that night, same as always. Vanessa didn't reach for her purse. She never does. On the drive home, I thought about Carol, about the two of us sleeping in the back of a pickup truck the first 2 summers of this business, about every callus on my hands that paid for the life my son now takes for granted. I decided right then I wasn't going to let anybody take it from him, especially not some woman who married him for a life she thought she was owed. The knock came the very next morning at 9 sharp. I opened the door to find Danny and Vanessa on my porch. Vanessa holding a slick leather folder like she was about to pitch a television show. "Dad," Danny said, beaming. "Vanessa's been up half the night working on something for you. She really thinks you're going to love this." I let them in, poured coffee, and sat while Vanessa spread out a glossy little presentation on my kitchen table pie charts. Tax estimates, a bright red circle drawn around the North Storage Building on an aerial map. "Walter, you're bleeding money on that shed," she said, her voice dripping with rehearsed concern. "Property taxes on a building doing nothing but collecting dust? At your age, you should be enjoying life, not carrying dead weight. I've got developer contacts who'd pay top dollar, no hassle. I'd handle everything. You wouldn't lift a finger." Danny nodded along like she was reciting scripture. "Dad, she's right. You don't need the stress. Let her help." I flipped through her paperwork slow, like an old man overwhelmed by numbers, letting her believe every word was landing. She'd clearly done her homework on the public tax records. What she didn't know is that public tax records don't tell you a single true thing about what's actually inside that building. "This is an awful lot to take in," I said, tapping the folder. "I never sign anything the same day I read it. Let me sit with this a week." Her jaw ticked, just barely, the first crack in that camera-ready smile. "Of course, Walter. Just remember, opportunities like this don't wait forever." As I walked them out, I caught her eyes drift toward the hallway closet, where I keep an old fireproof filing cabinet. She looked at it 2 seconds too long. 2 seconds was all I needed. I spent that Sunday morning sitting with my coffee, staring at that filing cabinet, replaying the hunger in her eyes. Men and women like Vanessa can't hide greed once it's been fed a taste. I decided I wasn't going to accuse her of anything. If I called her out directly, Danny would defend her with his whole chest, and I'd become the bitter old father trying to ruin his son's marriage. I had to let her think she was winning. I had to feed the greed until it made her reckless enough to show Danny exactly who she was, with her own mouth, in her own words. I called Ray that afternoon. "I need you to pull the old lease papers on the North Building," I told him. "Copies only, cover pages, my name as owner, tax numbers. Leave out anything about the Harbor Authority contract. Make it look like a plain storage shed sitting empty." "We setting a trap, boss?" Ray asked. "We're baiting one," I said. 2 weeks of silence followed. I ignored her texts, dodged her calls, let her stew in her own impatience. The crack finally showed on a Tuesday morning outside Danny's little bait-and-tackle shop downtown, the one thing that's entirely his, that he built himself with money he saved for 3 years. I was walking up with his favorite coffee when I saw a tow truck backed against his delivery van, the hydraulic lift already grinding it up off the pavement. Danny was standing on the sidewalk, pale, holding his phone, while a man with a clipboard looked at him without a shred of sympathy. "Dad," Danny said when he saw me, his voice cracking, "they're saying we missed 3 lease payments on the van. That's impossible. Vanessa handles the business account. She set up the auto pay months ago." I turned to the driver. "There's got to be a mistake here, friend." He didn't even look up. "Recovery order came in yesterday. 90 days delinquent. Not my problem, pal." I was reaching for my checkbook when tires screeched behind us. Vanessa's leased sedan swung into the lot, and she came running toward us, hair a mess, mascara smudged, nothing at all like the woman who does 12-minute skincare videos for a living. "Stop right there," she shouted at the driver. "This is a banking error. Drop that vehicle now." The driver crossed his arms. "Account's empty, ma'am. Payments bounced." I watched her hands shake as she dialed her phone, pacing in tight little circles, hissing into it about a security hold and a fraud flag. 10 frantic minutes later, she thrust the phone at the driver, and whatever voice was on the other end bought her 30 days. The van came down. Danny hugged her, relieved, telling her not to worry about it. But over Danny's shoulder, for one bare second, her mask slipped completely, and what I saw looking back at me wasn't embarrassment. It was fear. Real, cold fear. Women who run six-figure brand consulting businesses do not have their husband's delivery van repossessed over a glitch. They do not pace an alley shaking like an addict 2 days from her next fix. My gut, already suspicious, turned into something close to certainty. Vanessa was drowning in debt, and she'd been quietly draining Danny's shop to keep her head above water, all while hunting for a bigger score to bail herself out completely. That bigger score, I now understood, was my North Storage building. That Friday, they showed up at my door with overnight bags, claiming a burst pipe had flooded their apartment. I knew better a woman that desperate doesn't check into her father-in-law's guest room over a busted pipe. She checks into a hotel and lets the insurance handle it. But I smiled and gave them the spare room anyway, because I needed her close. I didn't sleep that night. At exactly 2:10 in the morning, I heard the third stair from the bottom groan the way it always does. I lay still in the dark and listened as soft footsteps crossed the downstairs hallway toward my study. Through the crack in the door, I watched Vanessa kneeling in front of my filing cabinet, a pen light between her teeth, working the lock with a thin metal pick like she'd learned it off some video online. She wasn't a professional. She was a desperate woman who'd run out of patient options. I let her get the drawer open before I flipped the hallway light on. She gasped and spun around, caught cold. "Vanessa," I said, keeping my voice groggy and mild. "What in the world are you doing down here in the dark?" She recovered fast, hand over her heart, breathless. "Walter, I'm so sorry. I couldn't sleep. I was looking for water and got turned around in the hallway. Kitchen's the other way," I said gently. "Let me show you." When she'd gone back up to bed, I checked the drawer. She'd found the folder with my property records, and in her panic to close things up, she'd left it sticking out just enough to tell me exactly what she'd been hunting for. The next morning I hired Marcus Webb, a private investigator I'd used twice before in my life, both times when I needed the truth about somebody fast. 3 days later he slid into the booth across from me at the diner near the marina with a thick folder and tired eyes. "You were right to be suspicious, Walter," he said. "Vanessa's consulting business is mostly smoke. She's had exactly 2 paying clients in the last year. Everything you see online is staged for the followers, and the followers are the product she sells them a course on financial freedom while she's got nothing herself. How's she affording the car, the clothes?" "Credit," Marcus said. "Maxed 6 ways. And 2 years ago she put almost all of it, plus a chunk of family money, into some online trading platform that turned out to be a scam. Lost nearly all of it in a weekend. When the banks cut her off, she went looking for private money. She currently owes just under $180,000 to a man named Sal Petrosian, who does not run a bank. Walter. He runs a very different kind of business out of the East Side." My stomach went cold. "There's more," Marcus said, sliding another page across. "She's been skimming from Danny's shop account for the better part of 10 months. Small amounts, dressed up as supply orders. That's why the van got repossessed. His lease payments have been bouncing because she's been feeding that money somewhere else. By the end of the season, if this keeps up, that shop closes." I sat there feeling the same cold, focused calm I used to feel standing over a busted engine, knowing exactly which bolt to loosen first. She had put my son's life's work at risk, put debt collectors on his doorstep, and lied to his face every single day while she did it. That was a line that didn't get uncrossed. "You want me to call it in?" Marcus asked. "I've got a contact in financial crimes." I shook my head. "If the police pick her up now, Danny thinks it's a misunderstanding. He visits her. He forgives her. He'll believe every excuse she feeds him through a jail phone. I need him to see it himself, with his own eyes, so there's no story she can spin afterward." That afternoon I drove out to the shop and found Ray in the back office. "I need a fake inventory sheet," I told him. "Something valuable enough that a desperate person would risk everything to get their hands on it." "What kind of valuable?" Ray asked. "Marine salvage electronics," I said. "Untraceable, high resale, sitting in the North building. Make it look like it's been sitting there off the books for years." We spent 2 hours building a manifest recovered navigation systems and sonar equipment supposedly pulled from decommissioned military surplus boats worth an estimated $400,000, listed as unregistered and sitting in the North Storage building. I stamped it confidential in red ink and slid it into the same filing cabinet drawer Vanessa had already cracked once, wedged deep enough that she'd have to dig, shallow enough that she'd find it fast. Then I had 3 hidden cameras installed in my study, disguised as a smoke detector, a clock radio, and a phone charger, every angle covering that cabinet. That night at dinner, Vanessa was practically glowing with nervous energy, her knee bouncing under the table, and I knew the trap was working exactly as designed. Around midnight, the floorboard groaned again. I watched on my phone as she slipped into the study, found the folder, and read every word of it with her mouth slightly open, like a woman looking at a winning lottery ticket. She photographed every page with shaking hands before creeping back upstairs. The next morning, I slipped a small listening device into the lining of her purse while she showered. I told myself it was the only way left to protect my son. By that afternoon, sitting in my truck 2 blocks away, I heard her make the call. "Sal, listen to me," she said, her voice climbing into a register I hadn't heard from her before. "I found something bigger, way bigger than the shop money. There's a warehouse, my father-in-law's storage building. It's full of recovered marine electronics. Has to be 400 grand worth sitting there completely off the books. No insurance claim, nobody's watching it." The voice that answered was low and flat. "You said that about the shop money too, Vanessa. You have 5 days. This is real, Sal. I saw the paperwork myself. Give me the crew. I'll get you the door codes. You clean the place out in 1 night. Take your money, and I disappear." "And your husband?" the voice asked. She didn't hesitate, not even a little. "He'll never know it was me. Let him think it was random. I'm not sticking around for that mess anyway. Once this clears, I'm done with him and this whole sad little marina town." I sat in my truck feeling something in my chest go cold and still. She wasn't just stealing from an old man's shed. She was willing to let armed men break into a building with her own husband's name on the business license and vanish afterward without a second thought for what happened to Danny once the dust settled. I stopped feeling anything close to mercy for her right then. What she and her hired men didn't know is that the North Storage Building hasn't held spare parts in 5 years. 3 years ago, the Regional Maritime Authority approached me quietly about a piece of land they needed. Isolated, waterfront, easy access for barges, easy to secure. I leased them the North Building and the acre around it to serve as a secure evidence and equipment staging site for federal drug interdiction operations along the coast. From the outside, it still looks like a rusted-out storage shed I never bothered to fix. That's exactly the point. Inside, it's wired with motion sensors, silent alarms tied directly to Coast Guard and Federal Task Force dispatch. And there's an armed detail on site around the clock, because sometimes what gets stored there overnight is evidence in ongoing federal cases. I gave her exactly the 5 days her creditor demanded. During that time, I drove Danny out to his mother's old flower bed one evening, telling him I had something of hers to show him. He didn't argue. He never does with me. We parked in an unlit lot across from the marina, and I opened my laptop, showing him the security feed from inside a building he'd walked past his whole life without a second thought. I told him the truth, plainly, without softening a single word. I told him his wife had lost her savings to a scam, owed a dangerous man real money, had been quietly bleeding his shop account dry for the better part of a year, and had just sold out a fake inventory list to a criminal crew to save her own skin, and that when asked what happened to him in the process, she'd said he'd never know it was her. Danny went white and silent in a way I'd never seen from my son. He wanted to argue, to defend her the way he always has, but the words wouldn't come. I put my hand over his and told him to watch the screen, because in a few minutes he was going to see exactly who his wife really was. At midnight, headlights swept across the lot. A dark van rolled up outside the North Building, and 3 men climbed out, 2 of them broad-shouldered, carrying rifles slung across their chests, and Vanessa behind them in dark clothes, holding bolt cutters like she'd rehearsed it in a mirror. Danny made a sound beside me I'll never forget, something between a gasp and a sob. We heard her voice clear through the feed. "There's no cameras on this fence. The old man doesn't believe in security systems. He thinks nobody wants his junk. I've got the door code memorized. We're in and out in 20 minutes. One of the men grunted. "This better be real, or you're the one explaining it to Sal." "It's real," she snapped. "I saw the manifest myself." She cut the chain. The gate screeched open. She crossed the yard, punched in the door code she'd photographed off my fake paperwork, and the moment she and the 2 armed men stepped through that threshold and crossed the motion sensors, The entire lot lit up like daylight. A federal siren tore through the night. Danny grabbed my arm so hard it left a mark. Armed federal agents poured out from 3 directions, weapons raised, shouting for everyone to drop to the ground. The 2 men with rifles went down immediately, hands behind their heads, faces in the dirt. No argument at all. Men like that know exactly what a losing position looks like. Vanessa didn't go down quietly. She screamed that it was a mistake, that she was just visiting her father-in-law's property, right up until an agent had her face down in the gravel with her wrists zip-tied behind her back. Through the feed, we watched her sob into the dirt, the same way she'd once cried on camera about a canceled Pilates class. Danny didn't say a word the whole drive home. He just stared out the window, and somewhere past the marina, I heard him start to cry, quiet, the way a grown man cries when something inside him breaks clean in half. 3 days later, sitting at my kitchen table, his phone rang with a number neither of us recognized. He looked at me, and I nodded. He answered, "Put it on speaker." The automated voice announced a collect call from the county detention center. Vanessa's voice came through next, high and frantic, already spinning a story about being in the wrong place at the wrong time, begging him to call a lawyer, to wire bail money, telling him none of it was what it looked like. Danny sat there listening to her lie to him one more time, and something in his face finally hardened all the way through. He reached over, took the phone from my hand, "No, I'm sorry," from his own hand, because this was his fight to finish, and said, "I heard everything, Vanessa. I watched you say I'd never know it was you." Then he hung up and blocked the number, and he didn't shed one more tear over her after that. Federal charges followed for all 3 of them: conspiracy, attempted theft of federal property, weapons charges for the 2 men she'd hired. A judge denied every one of them bail. Vanessa was looking at years, not months, and there wasn't a lawyer alive who could talk her way out of what 3 federal agents had on video. Danny filed for divorce that same week. The shop, once free of whatever she'd been quietly bleeding out of it, started climbing back to where it used to be within a month. He hired a new part-time clerk, started sleeping again, started laughing at the counter with regular customers the way he used to before she ever walked into our lives. About 6 weeks after that night, I sat him down at Carol's old kitchen table and slid a small brass key across to him. He looked at it, confused, the same way his mother used to look at me when I was about to surprise her with something. I told him that a man who spends his whole life pulling engines out of dying boats learns early that you never keep your real treasure somewhere a stranger might think to look. 3 years before Carol passed, we'd quietly set up a trust in Danny's name alone, completely separate from the shop, from the house, from anything with our names easily attached to it. Vanessa had spent 1.5 years hunting for a fortune hidden in a rusted storage shed, never once suspecting the real inheritance had been sitting untouchable in his name the entire time, protected by paperwork she never thought to look for, because she never once believed an old man in an oil-stained cap could outthink her. He hugged me the way he used to when he was 7 years old and scared of a thunderstorm, and I held on to my son and didn't let go for a good long while. That Sunday evening I sat out on the dock behind the shop with a glass of bourbon, watching the last of the light go orange over the water. I thought about Carol, about the promise I made her at the graveside, about every callus this business ever put on my hands. I raised my glass to the water and said it out loud, just for her to hear. Greed always shows its true face eventually, if you're patient enough to wait for it. You can build the prettiest life on top of a lie, but sooner or later the foundation cracks, and everybody standing on it goes down with it. What actually protects a family isn't money sitting in a warehouse or an account somebody can find if they dig hard enough. It's the years you put in when nobody's watching. The promises you keep long after the person you made them to is gone. If this story taught you that karma always finds its way home, hit that like button for me. And tell me, have you ever had someone marry into your family who turned out to be after something other than love? Tell me about it down in the comments. I read every single one. Until next time, take care of the people who'd take a bullet for you, and keep a close eye on the ones who wouldn't.